Thanks, everybody. Well, welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. For going on 5 seasons now, writer Stephen Knight, producer Caryn Mandabach, and star Cillian Murphy have beautifully brought to life early 20th century England, complete with gangsters, politicians, Tommy guns, drugs, boxing, and the rugged sounds of smoke-filled throats. In the upcoming 5th season of Peaky Blinders, Murphy's Tommy Shelby is looking to take over politics, but once again, an ensuing war could foil his plans. Let's take a look.
When I sleep, I dream, and in my dream, someone wants my crown.
Down in a city's hollow,
That is God, and that are the Peaky Blinders.
we fool around with a shadow.
People think that I'm gonna fall. Who's gonna take the throne, eh?
We better run.
We have never even heard of your people, so we are not afraid of your threats.
They said that Tommy Shelby was a spent force, that he was spent in the head.
3, 2, 1, bang.
So, Tommy Shelby, it's war you want. It's war you shall have.
There will be a war, and one of you will die. But which one I cannot tell.
Mr. Shelby, you've come to my attention. I will have need of men like you, except there is no other man like you.
Sometimes killing is a kindness.
It will be Tommy Shelby who's crucified, and there will be no resurrection.
We're on the ropes. Who's gonna hang us now?
No one is going to hang you, Tommy. You're going to hang yourself.
You have some kind of death wish, Mr. Shelby.
Nothing can stop us.
Now you've heard of us.
Everybody, please welcome from Peaky Blinders, Stephen Knight, Caryn Mandabach, and Tommy Shelby himself, Cillian Murphy. Thank you so much for being here. You guys, I love the show. It's beautiful, incredible performances, amazing production design, and incredible storytelling by a man who writes every episode. First off, how the hell do you do that? You've also written and directed movies not so long ago as well. How are you doing that?
I don't know. I keep getting asked that question, and I don't know what the answer is. I think the simplest answer is I get up early.
What do you got for hours in you when it comes to writing? Can you get up early and go all day? Or
No,
you got
no.
3?
I'd say if you 6 till 2:30.
That's
But
pretty good.
just keep going, just keep going. I mean, the way I tend to write is just to start and not plan it and just let it happen like a dream and just write it and then see what happens when you read it back.
And then go back and edit and figure out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a bit.
When Peaky Blinders started, when you first started this series, did you expect that you would be writing every episode, that you would hold on to it like this, or did you think you would eventually bring on a team of writers or anything else?
Yeah, we did experiment, funnily enough, in the first series with bringing other people on, but I think it's such a personal thing to me.
We had 2 directors in the first series.
Yeah.
Since then, you've only had 1 per season, right?
We had one. Yeah, there used to be I mean, I think Peaky changed a lot of things in the way that this stuff is done. And in those days, it used to be 2 directors so that the first director could get on with editing while the second director was doing. But we found it's better to get one director in and do the whole series. So, and in terms of other writers, we tried it, but I find it much more difficult to do it with other writers because it just is more difficult. I find it much easier to be on my own and just do it.
You know, I was interviewing Don Winslow not that long ago, the novelist, and he said that in the morning he writes his first draft, and in the afternoon he's researching for the next book. Often, when are you doing the research for Peaky Blinders? How much research is required for these scripts?
It's what tends to happen with Peaky is that it moves on 2 or 3 years. So then I take a look, and it's not an in-depth look; it's a look at what was happening at that time. And then I try to research not via history books, wherever I can through anecdotes, people speaking, people who have recorded their experiences. Local newspapers are great. And sometimes a trick that I do is like, say, Birmingham, 1934, ice cream. You know, just something random.
Yeah.
And if you're on the internet, it'll take you to something that happened.
Right. You'll get some random
and
story.
some
yeah.
random thing will come up, and you can get other random, and that will lead you to another random thing. Because I think, in my opinion, history is random events, and it's only historians who find the pattern subsequently and make it appear that it was inevitable, that what actually happened was inevitable, but it never was. So I think there is a randomness and an oddness and a quirkiness about reality that if you can try and get that in, that helps.
And if you look at most historical movies and historical shows, the best moments in them are not necessarily the moments where Churchill gave the speech or something. It's the moment where Churchill was getting out of bed and doing something weird, and
couldn't
everybody
find
kind
his
of
cigar.
remembers
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
and that becomes an iconic moment of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's it's the individual human frailties and strengths that people are actually interested in, rather than the collective consequence of the small events.
How do you focus on the individual frailties and strengths of Tommy Shelby, as well as make sure that you're presenting in some way a sympathetic character who is on this other side of the law and is ostensibly doing terrible things at times? I'm sure you are aware consistently that you want the audience to be on his side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it all starts with the writing, because the writing is so rich and so complex and so detailed for Tommy's character and for all of the characters. But, Steve said something recently which made sense to me, and, he is inevitably, I suppose, he would be classed as an anti-hero in our kind of, in the vernacular of TV shows, or, the way we look at gangster shows. But Steve said something. He said, he's a good man who does bad things to a good end, and that to me kind of sums up the contradiction of the character, because there are so many things about him that you could, isolate and admire. Then there's many things that you would be horrified by, and yet to try and play that contradiction is brilliant, because ultimately drama is contradiction, I think.
Do you find that often? Because there's a scene right away by the third episode of the new season that immediately establishes Shelby's moral code and gives the audience in some way, I don't want to say an out with him, but a moment where we can identify and sympathize with him. This is where the line gets crossed for him. Do you find that those scenes help you as well as an actor to make sure that you stand on the same side with Tommy?
No, I don't necessarily need, as Cillian, to agree with any character I play. That would limit the amount of characters I could play drastically.
Fair enough.
But I need to understand and comprehend. And I think if you're referring to when Tommy begins to recognize that fascism, for example, as represented by Oswald Mosley.
I was referring to the orphanage.
Oh, the orphanage. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's another example of
It's
where...
very clear, like, to use a cliche term, kind of a save the cat moment, where suddenly we see he cares very deeply about this one thing that everybody would care about.
For sure, yeah, and I don't want to give anything away about that, but yeah, that is an example, and I think it's like if you watch the whole show, you'll begin to realize that what's happening gradually is that we're beginning to see more and more of the character that existed pre-First World War, before he was so traumatized and devastated by his experiences in France, in the trenches, and we're beginning to see, I think, some of those values and things that were important to him, seeing them be kind of, being, they were dormant for a long time, and they're now coming back to life, I think.
Caryn, you've been with the show since the beginning, right? How has the show, I mean, Stephen was kind of alluding to it, that after the first season, you sort of figured new things out as to the flow, I think, the workflow of the show. How did that work for you? Like, I mean, you had 2 directors on the first season, and he had said that he tried to bring new writers in as a producer. What did you notice had to change and had to work differently?
It was always a problem. Money was always a problem.
Well, yeah, because it's...
And I, just to start with that, so...
It's a show that looks like it costs money.
It doesn't. And so
Really?
Really?
Okay,
really,
hold on a second.
Really?
What do you mean it doesn't cost money?
We probably spend about 1/5 of what the Crown spends, if that gives you a little bit, maybe 1/4. But we are broke, I think you'd have to say, insofar as the ambition the quality of talent. So we've done a lot as we had to make really specific choices. And luckily, early on, great artists, the directors we've had, everyone we've worked with, obviously the musicians, and actually wanted to work on the show as opposed to thinking of it as just another gig. So that gained a bit of momentum, and we were able to attract people who, it was as if, it's like falling in love. You know, you can say, well, I really want to fall in love by 6 o'clock today. You know, sometimes you get lucky, mostly you don't. But because people were looking for this kind of love, we got to work with all the best. Look at the actors we got. I mean, I'm out we're out now to a fancy person to play in next season, and I literally had to say to the agent, look, I know she's extremely, extremely fancy, but tell her she's not going to get milk in her tea. There will not be a car. I'm sorry to say, we like buses. I mean, it's a real gift that we've been given by the creative community, who, in kind, like he said, responds to the writing.
Right.
So you therefore are enabling the community to do something they really, really want to do. Therefore, you can do it for cheaper. HODs do it for half their fee. I mean, we've been extremely fortunate just simply because we are handcrafted. The company is CMP. It's my company, so it's not like a giant corp, you know. We handcraft. He's the executive producer. We don't always go to this. Why bother? He's there. So we take responsibility for each other.
What did you say? He's there, we don't always...
Well, he's there all the time. You know, he's on almost every scene.
Yeah, of course.
So he's an executive producer who makes note of things that are important to the rest of the producing and directing community that we inhabit.
Forgive me for not knowing this. Have you been executive producer since the beginning?
No, since I think series 3, was it?
Since series 3.
Yeah.
I begged him.
You begged him?
Yeah.
What was that? What was it like making that decision?
Well, you know, for me, it was very illuminating, really, because generally as an actor, you know, you turn up, you do your work as best you can, you say the lines, you go home, and then you see it a year later or however long it takes to make the product. That's a terrible word. To make the piece of art.
And then, why did they use that take? God damn
well,
it.
no, you've totally forgotten by then. Do you know what I mean? But so this was a very interesting exercise in, you know, having to watch the edit, for example, and to be able to watch my own performance in a kind of completely objective, sober sort of way. That's been very educational for me.
Right, you can go in the edit room and you can actually sort of ask questions about your performance and your take.
I don't do that. I don't go in the edit
that.
room. I would not go in the edit room. That's a sacred place for the director and the editor, really. But when the edits of, you know, it'll go through various edits.
Sure, you get it, yeah.
Yeah, then you can talk about it. But so that's been very interesting, and all the, you know, cool stuff like special effects and grading and music and all that post-production stuff that as an actor you're never generally privy to. That's been very, very interesting for me.
Why did you beg him to come on as an executive producer?
Well, because he's valuable. You know, we take the role of, people, producers like me, longtime producers, take the role seriously. We don't believe in just giving anybody a credit just because they're, you know, married to someone or because it's someone's manager or there's some kind of a language quid pro quo where they have to. Because he
These
contributes.
all sound like specific circumstances.
No.
No,
This is Hollywood just generally. But because of the additive value of his intellect and the nature of his participation, I felt strongly that it would be helpful to the product and keep the budget, to be quite frank, in a way, and all things related to the budget. Choices had to be made exquisitely well. No room for messing about.
Right. We should say that, you know, you are in your own way, a kind of legendary producer. You've produced an incredible amount of movies.
Legend.
I don't know if some people don't like being called legend. I don't know how you feel about it. But it's true. You have a filmography that is amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. So what?
Just throw my ass kiss back at me. I love it. Thank you. What made you, I mean, had you been thinking about TV for a long time? What made you jump onto Peaky Blinders with Steve?
Well, I'm lucky, obviously. So that's craft is the answer. So if we are in show business, we have one foot on the dock and one foot on the boat. And a lot of people really are on the dock. I really didn't want to be on the dock. I really wanted to be on the boat. I wanted to be part of the community that crafts things. So to be on the dock is safe. To be on the dock is to be a lawyer who calls him or herself a chief creative officer, having never read a script. So I had respect for the everyone in the community. And what you do as a producer is start with respect. Who could not, I mean, who could not respect what he was up to, who could not respect what he was up to. So to be able to do that and not have to have any corporate diktats is the joy.
Amazing, by the way. I'm like blown away by you right now.
Why?
Nobody talks this openly about producing on this stage. No
Why
one
not?
talks about it like this.
Oh.
Because I think people are afraid to say some of the things that you're saying.
I invested my own money, started my own company. Entrepreneurs all day long.
Pretty badass. And when you met with Stephen, how much did you have written when it came to the first series?
It was something that I wanted to do since I was first started to write, because these are the story, the backstory of Peaky Blinders is basically the story of my family and my parents who grew up in Smallheath in the 20s. And my mum worked for an illegal bookmaker. My dad's uncles were illegal bookmakers who were called the Peaky Blinders. So I heard all these stories when I was a kid. They experienced these things when they were kids, so that there was this double mythology. So I always felt that there was a drama to be told here, in spite of the fact that it was Birmingham, which is, in the UK is quite an unfashionable city. It was the 20s. It was a sort of, it's a tough sell, if you like. But I always felt it would work. And probably 20 years, at least 20 years before this whole thing started going, I'd written a sort of a script when because I was working in television then I worked in film more. And then when television started to change, I got a call from Caryn, who, instead of having an office, had a table at the Royal Festival Hall.
Members bar.
Members bar. So we used to have meetings there. And she said, have you got any television stuff? And I said, well, there's this thing that's in the bottom drawer, which has been a passion project of mine for so long. And we went to see a wonderful person called Anne Menser at the BBC. The BBC, by the way, are fantastic for taking a creative idea. If they like it, they'll say, OK, go off and do it. You don't get the endless meetings. You don't get the studio notes. You don't get all of that stuff. You get given the freedom to actually develop this thing and do it. So I think I wrote 3 scripts and they greenlit it, and then we got going.
As a writer, you seem, just based off of writing all of this show, the movies that you've written, somewhat prolific. When someone comes to you and says, what do you got for a TV show? How many things did you actually have in your drawer that you could have
funnily enough,
shown?
at that time for TV, not just that, because you've got to remember this was at the beginning of when TV became what it is now. Right. And it was just the beginning of all these great dramas coming out of the US and the great stuff coming out of Britain as well. And so,
consider like any of your movie scripts that you could possibly turn into TV shows, or was that not even the time where people were thinking like that?
That's the industry now. That's what everybody's doing now. At the time, I think they are different things. I think on reflection, there is a vast difference between what you should do as a movie and what you should do as a TV. And I think TV, I think, is now opening that locked library door of some classic stuff that are great novels that I think you can do justice to in 8 hours or 24 hours even. You can do justice to those great stories, whereas before with a film in 90 minutes it was tough. So I think television is in a very exciting place. I think we were ahead of the game thanks to Caryn, who's always ahead of the game. And is a legend. And I think we got incredibly lucky with getting Cillian. The first thing was getting Cillian. Once we got Cillian, everything else he brings with him a cachet, and he brings with him a reputation that suddenly lots of people want to get involved. So we sort of got a credibility very early on because of Cillian.
Well, Cillian, I'm not sure if you're aware of your credibility when you jump onto something, but what made you want to bring along your credibility and cachet, as Stephen has said it, when you first got the scripts for Peaky Blinders?
Well, it's very, very simple. I don't think about it in those terms. You think about it selfishly. You look for the best work. And for me, it's always been about the writing. That's the only metric I have in terms of the choice of doing something. And I was aware, I think, that there was something changing in television. This is 7 or 8 years ago. I think everybody was kind of aware, that those iconic American shows had been on and we'd watched them, and everyone was kind of conscious of that. I think the BBC were conscious of that. And so I was keen to read some good scripts, and they were the first TV scripts I got sent really, really quickly. and I couldn't understand the title. Didn't know what it meant. I was like, I don't know about that. And then I
Yeah, Peaky Blinders.
I don't know what does that mean. And then I read it, just purely the opening, the opening sequence. It was so beautiful and mythical and epic, and then I was just in and hooked, and I knew I had to do it. And for me as well, the idea that the show, the writing could start at that level of quality and then keep getting richer and deeper and more complex as we've gone on, that's never happens as far as the TV I've watched, and that's a tribute to Steve and to Caryn.
And when people say someone is a great writer or the writing is so great, I think sometimes people hear that and they don't know exactly what that means. They think, is the dialogue really great? But I'm curious, I think what you're referring to in that opening sequence is that on the page, you could see exactly how this was going to be executed. Like you could feel it and see it, and there was going to be no room for interpretation or mistakes on set in a lot of ways.
Yeah, all we had to do as a production was do justice to the writing. Right. Do you know?
I would jump in and just say that television is my medium. I have done a couple of successful movies, actually, but that was a long time ago, and television is what I know best, and I'll tell you one thing for sure, it's all about the writing, all about the writing, all about the writing, all about the writing. Anything else, you can talk about the movie business, and it's not necessarily all about the writing. It helps, but in television, because it's so intimate, and so what he's referring to with regard to the scene, the opening scene, is not so much the epic nature of it or the mythologized nature of it, but he's referring to the subtext that carries that character. Harry, the barman, says something. A couple of little kids are frightened of him. There's some smoke red being blown. He's so obviously iconic, and he's got such a giant subtext. He's clearly PhD. He's got a PhD in PTSD. Yeah, so he's got all that going for him, because that means if you have someone with subtext, that means it has legs. So what Steve did uniquely, you could talk about returning series. It has two different meanings in America versus other England or France or anything else. In America, we know what that means. It has a lead. It has a single lead. That guy's called Walter White or Don Draper or Tony Soprano or Nurse Jackie. And we don't necessarily invest in the import that the lead has. And we're watching, as viewers, we're watching, even if Tony Soprano isn't in the scene and you're watching Carmela and the priest have a conversation, all you can think of is, geez, I wonder what Tony would think if he saw. So inside, he knows what he's playing. He's playing someone who's pretty complicated and worth your time.
I'm curious, this is an esoteric question, but I believe at the beginning of your career, one of the first things you did was Disco Pigs, a play which I saw recently at the Irish Rep, and you weren't starring in it. Someone else was, but it literally blew my mind. I didn't know you could do that with theater. It was like Beckett on speed, which was just so incredible. And it's such a loquacious and fast-talking work, yet you've sort of settled into some ways these characters who are somewhat quiet and solemn and menacing. Have you noticed that transition for you in terms of your work, considering you started from this place of, literally speaking as fast as possible, as quickly as possible in that first play?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I still do a lot of theater.
Yeah, and excuse me for forgetting the playwright's name, but you just did
Edna Walsh.
Edna Walsh.
He's
just did a
terrific, kind of one of our greatest Irish writers, and I have a long relationship. In fact, that was my first ever professional role, was in that play. I don't know. For me, I've always thought that you're just an actor, and I would never like to be categorized as a theater actor or a television actor or a film actor. You're just an actor. And for me, the medium is always secondary to the character and to the writing. And so I've had great experiences in the theater. I've had great experiences clearly on television, and I've made some films that I've enjoyed. But to me, it's all about following the character and the writing. And so yeah, the sort of work that I do in theatre has little or no bears little or no resemblance to the work that I do in Peaky Blinders, for example. But that's what you should do as an actor: is be curious and experiment and gain experience from different types of writing, different media, and that's what you should do. That's certainly what I need to do to be to keep myself interested.
I have a question on Twitter. It's I don't know what their name is here. Absolutely love Peaky Blinders. How hard is it to keep with the Birmingham accents?
I guess Steve is from Birmingham, so he's no problem.
Yeah, it's a difficult accent to do for some reason. In the UK, people can do northern and southern and eastern and western, but Birmingham is tricky.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's. I mean, I've lost my accent now pretty much, but when I was left home, people couldn't understand what I was saying because my accent was so broad. But it's got sort of a tune to it as well, which is very hard to get. But at the very beginning, the real Garrison pub the Garrison is a real pub in Smallheath, which is not like the Garrison pub on the TV. But we went there. I took Cillian there with some of my mates who still have broad Birmingham accents, and Cillian bought a tape recorder. And we just drank a lot of Guinness and talked and ended up singing. And yeah, I mean, it was we were supposed to be there before a football match, and we didn't bother going to the football match. We just stayed in the pub. And I believe that Cillian took that recording and worked on it. And I think Cillian, from the beginning, has hit the ground running. I think other people have had more problems with it. But yeah, it can be a challenge, but I never wanted it to be an obstacle to performance, really.
On top of the accent, how difficult is it to maintain the sort of cigarette, whiskey-soaked throat thing that you have to do as Tommy?
Well, it was a series of decisions really for me and for the whole creative team. Was like, how do we? Because he's a decorated war veteran. He's clearly fearless and hugely intellectual and all of that, and also he's very intimidating, and he has this. He's the sort of person that walks into a room and people just pay attention. So and he also has this physical presence. So I try to employ every trick to try and make him a bit more intimidating, because clearly I don't have that walking around. So yeah, I dropped the voice a little bit, got that vicious haircut, and you
have to have a version of that, though. You've been cast as intimidating characters on multiple occasions.
I mean, a comic book villain, I suppose, but that's broader. Kind of, you can have a bit of fun. But this guy,
Red Eye as well.
I guess so. But this guy is the real deal in terms of what he's been through, and us having to really be aware that people did live through the First World War, and people did witness things that like that sort of mechanized slaughter, which had never ever been witnessed before on the planet. And so to try and be respectful of that he has been through this, and there's a reason why he is behaving, not to justify it, but you can see why he got to that place. So anyway, it was a series of exercises and decisions to try and give him that sort of that air of like, you don't fuck with him, you know what I mean?
Is it one of those things where once you make that decision when you're on set, you kind of can't drop that? You have to sort of maintain that throughout. And I don't mean like a method acting, emotional thing. I just mean in order to keep your voice in that register.
Now it's really simple for me.
You can drop in and out of it?
Yeah, I'm not going to do it.
No. I am not that guy. Don't worry.
It's I don't know. It's like riding a bike now. Not that it's easy, but he's in my DNA now. He's in my genes. You know what I mean? He's there. So I have to shake him to get him going again. But he's there. There's an imprint there.
A few questions from the audience. Right here. Hi.
Hi. So my question is for Cillian. I first saw you in Cork in the aforementioned production of Disco Pigs.
Wow, lucky you.
And most recently, I did see you in Grief is a Thing with Feathers at St. Anne's Warehouse. I just wanted to know, how did that relationship with Inda Walsh begin, and how have you managed to maintain it for like 20 plus years now?
Well, I wanted to be a musician, and that wasn't really working out. And then I was very curious about theatre. I'd never really been to the theatre properly. And then I went to see a production of Clockwork Orange, the Anthony Burgess book. They did a production of that in Cork City, and Enda was part of the company that made that show, and it blew my windows completely. I thought it was the most exhilarating, sexy, frightening thing I'd ever seen in my life. And so I just pestered him. I pestered him in the pub. I used to follow him down the road. And then eventually he gave me an audition for that play when I was 19. And then we kept in touch, and we've made 4 or 5 shows now since then over the years. And he's a tremendous writer and a really dear friend.
Was Pigs also, I mean, I know you said he was part of the company for Clockwork, but wasn't Pigs one of his first shows as well, or am I incorrect?
As a writer?
Yeah.
Well, he'd written
Just a
a few, but it was the first successful show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Next question.
So I'm actually from Birmingham myself. Were you ever shocked that people were so invested in a show set in this little city? And what do you think of the impact it's had on the city?
It's been amazing. I mean, going back there now, obviously, I think this will take off in the UK, but maybe you know what Brummies are like. It's like they'll probably go, oh, this is not us. They're not doing it right, But it's really taken off there now as well. But in terms of how does the story of 1920s Birmingham, a very specific geography and time location, how does that resonate with so many people around the world? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I just know that the breadth of people who are responding to it. I mean, a friend of mine came back from Panama and said that in the hotel in Panama City, the barman was saving up money to get to Birmingham because they wanted to see the streets where the Peaky Blinders. And I thought, you poor, well, you know. But, and people, Snoop Dogg is a fan. And I'd spent 3 hours with Snoop Dogg when he came to London because he said he wanted to talk about Peakies. And he said it reminded him, of how he got involved in gang culture. Now, how that happens, I have no idea. And check out his new video, by the way, of Red Right Hand.
Oh, right, because Red Right Hand is used. Yeah. But so Snoop did a version of Red Right Hand?
Just last week.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. It is amazing.
I did not know that. I'm going to watch that. 2 more questions.
Hi, my question's for Cillian. What's been the most challenging scene for you to shoot, and how do you typically prepare for a challenging day or a challenging scene in particular?
Well, we have a really, really intense schedule. It's a TV schedule.
We're broke.
She's a legend.
I'm a legend, and we're broke.
Spoken like a true producer.
So the amount of setups, by that I mean scenes that you get through in one day is quite staggering. And for all the sort of, explosions and set pieces and gun battles that happen in the show, a lot of it is actually people talking in rooms, with this exquisite dialogue and these kind of brilliantly drawn characters. So the biggest challenge for me is always these big 6-page, 8-page scenes that take place between my character and generally sort of an antagonistic character, or say Helen McCrory's character. So they require a lot of preparation, and then we shoot them almost like a play, like 2 cameras, and then one on the other actor, one on me, so you don't have the problem of one actor going first, and so we cross-shoot them. So you can have like these 20, 25-minute takes, which are deeply satisfying as a performer and as an actor, because it's such great text. And they're, to me, they're the ones I look forward to most, I gotta say. All the fighting and shooting guns is fine, but unless you have that wonderful story and tension between the characters, unless the audience invests in the tension between the characters and the characters themselves, all that stuff is meaningless, really.
I mean, outside of 2 cameras, it's so surprising to hear, 1, that you're broke, and 2, that you move so quickly, because there is an extensive amount of coverage in each scene. A 6-page scene or a 6-minute scene, you wouldn't just get the cross-cutting. You've got wides, you've got close-ups, you've got the cross-cutting, plus you've got attention to detail of things that are being talked about.
That's what I'm saying about these amazing craftspeople.
Yeah.
Our director this year, Anthony, incredible, and our producer, Annie, incredible. They're so clever. He does episode 1, scene 1, and then later that afternoon, episode 6, scene 6. In other words, that's not quite that bad, but it is mind-boggling because we don't shoot in order. Get that. 2 facts. He writes all the episodes, he shoots out of order.
So all the episodes are
All
written prior
out of order,
to shoot.
out of order. Get it? So
And you
he's
block
gotta-
shoot,
He's
right?
got block shoot. We can't block shoot. Everything has to be done. That's why the producer, Jesus, everything has to be done scheduling wise to a fare thee well, and so that affects and terribly impacts. How do you as an actor, ask an actor to do things out of order? And we do the best we can, but nothing ever works. So
Yeah, how
so-
do you do that? I mean, so you
Yeah,
doing
see,
scene
that's what
one,
I'm saying.
Episode 1, she just wanted
Now
to
you
ask one
understand that.
question.
Yeah,
I haven't
that's it.
asked it yet.
That's the
You're
one.
doing scene 1, episode 1, scene 1, and then you're doing episode 6, scene 4, 5, whatever. How do you have someone that you're working with that knows that later in the day, so you can at least bounce that off of? Is that
He's
the
working with the
director?
producer on the schedule. He's informed of the schedule. The director is informed of the schedule. Nobody can believe how hard the schedule is. Everyone's in a state of shock all the time. But the fact that he'll respond so beautifully is so not. I mean, that's really hard work. I just
need
want to say
to
that.
know the scripts very intimately and very well. And
You get them all beforehand.
That's
and
another-
Yeah, yeah.
You spend a month or a few weeks reading the 400 pages that is these 6 scripts.
Yes, and that again is unusual to get all 6 scripts in their final draft, like these beautifully realized scripts, to get them prior to shooting. Many TV shows are shooting while the scripts are being written, which to me seems like if you could think of the worst possible way to shoot something, it would be that way. So we don't have that issue. We have everything is set and ready to go. But yeah, it's intense.
If there, why haven't you stepped up? And not stepped up is the wrong word. Excuse me. That implies like step up. But why
okay,
haven't-
I'm going to step up. all right?
Why have you? Why have you not directed a season? Considering that you're done writing them by the time they're shooting.
I mean, directing is very hard work anyway, but directing Peaky it's an achievement beyond my powers of physical strength, because it's like relentless, it's constant, and I wouldn't ever sort of swan in and say, oh, I want to do an episode. Someone has to really commit to the whole thing, and if you're going to commit to the whole thing, it's a year of your life at least, and you'd have to stop and not do anything else.
It's a year of your life as well. Are you on set for the shooting to answer questions? Or
I make the occasional visit and smoke some herbal cigarettes. But no, I mean, this thing works, like as Caryn was saying, because we're broke.
Yeah, we're broke.
This thing works like sort of clockwork because it has to. It's got a system. A lot of the people who are on the crew come back because they love the show. And as I say, a lot of people work for half what they would normally work for because they love it. And so there is a team of people and a system that really works, and there's absolutely no point as a writer going in, and doing the showrunner thing where you go in and start.
When we need him
making
to answer a question, we email him and say, we're about to shoot this scene, please can you help? So he doesn't actually physically, nor do I actually physically have, because we've got such a fantastic team on the ground, and it's a real tribute to them. The whole thing, we can blah, blah, blah us, but it's really, really important to recognize the incredible talent and the fact that they're such terrific craftspeople, the editors, everybody, so terrific, top of game, and they're doing it because they actually love the show. So artistic choices still matter, and that's what I'm most proud of.
one more question from the audience, right here.
Hi, my question is for Cillian. So I am super concerned about Tommy Shelby just in general. I know it's super it's cool being a Peaky Blinder. Everyone wants to be that gun-toting gangster, but what draws me to the show is the fact that Tommy is basically this grief and trauma. So
You think you can change him, right?
no, not even that. It's relatable in a weird way. But my question is, for this season, and maybe at least towards the end of this, to the end of the series, is he going to be okay? Where is he at? And how do you find that? What literature, or is he based on somebody that you know to get there?
Well, thank you very much for the question.
He's going to be fine.
Yeah, it's really it's a question for Stephen. I mean, I don't know. I'm too close to really to say probably. I mean, the thing about him is,
Dude,
we
We
can't.
can tell you, but we'd have to kill you, obviously.
Yeah, I mean.
No spoilers, but does he live or die?
Yeah, well,
It's spiraling, yeah.
You can unspiral as well.
But I think it's what I like is that we see in this series is that we see generally Tommy's always got a plan, you know, and he's always ahead of the curve and he's always ahead of people because he's so clever and such a brilliant strategist. And I think he's just trying to hold everybody together. He's trying to hold his family. He's trying to hold the company. He's trying to be an MP. He's trying to do the right thing. He's trying not to do the wrong thing, but he keeps getting dragged back in that classic gangster way. And I think he's crumbling emotionally and sort of psychologically underneath all of that pressure. Yeah, well, yeah, that's a question for this guy.
You know, when we go in the editing room, Steve starts to cry.
I'll just write it down.
Steve watches at the edits, and every single time he just weeps.
Is that true? Do you feel incredibly close to Tommy?
He just cries.
To the whole thing, I mean, to the whole process of it, because I think it's a very, you know, you do stuff and you write things and they go out there. Some things are lucky, and Peaky touch wood is a very lucky show in that we seem to fall upon good fortune a lot with actors and not so much availabilities, but their abilities and people coming to us and people having, you know, the show at heart and goodwill for the show. And then when you see it happen and it comes and it goes and it's just like a dance and you watch it unfold and it's sort of a bit different to how you expected, or it's the same, or it's a bit better. You just watch it go and you just think, wow, you know, there is a real emotion there for me anyway, and I think there is for a lot of members of the audience. We did a festival in Birmingham where lots of fans came. The amount of emotion there was incredible when people saw the cast, with people crying, and you know, it was really strong emotional connection to like we just saw, that people really want these people to be okay, you know? And there's me making their lives hell.
Does it feel like the show never gets far away from you from how you've written it?
Yeah,
like I feel like that's kind of what you were saying. Is sometimes
totally
you write it and it gets away from you somehow.
You know, you work in Hollywood. You know what you're signing on for. You know how it works. You know the system. You write your script. Maybe someone else does a pass. The director does a pass. So this thing never feels like yours unless you direct it yourself. But with Peaky, and because we all are close and we all work together for a long time, I am confident that the thing that I write and even you know the direction, the description of how the room looks, that's how it's going to look, and that's why writers, I think in general, love television, because the words you write get executed, and you know the writer is the person who owns the show, if you like, pretty much, and so that's why. For me, it's great to do something so personal through this medium and with such fantastic talent. I mean, Cillian, but all, you know, the whole cast are brilliant.
Guys, I love the show. It's beautiful, an incredible collaboration. I'm sorry that you're broke. I hope you figure that out. I hope you work it out one day.
Sad.
Yeah. But the show is coming to Netflix. Season 5 is coming to
October
Netflix.
4th.
October 4th.
Which I believe is soon.
Yeah, I believe that's Friday.
I believe that's Friday, and God bless Netflix for taking it all over the world. Happy as it would have been for us just to exist in BBC, whom we do love, and later on the iPlayer. It's so great that Netflix has taken it to Panama or wherever the hell it is. So it's incredibly important that you people are here and you understand. I'm an American, obviously, and the ideal situation is for everyone in the world to get what we're up to, because it's a human story told by a man about, for the most part, men and their families. And I guess there are men everywhere, and they have families everywhere. So we're trying to connect, you know what I'm saying? So we're really grateful to that.
Peaky Blinders, Season 5 on
Thank
Netflix
you.
this Friday. Everybody give them a huge round of applause for coming by. Let's hear it.
Thank you.